Hi, I'm Lindsay.
And I'm Charlie.
And this is the Jug O Sip podcast.
You can find us on Google and all social media at Jug O Sip Podcast.
New episodes release every Monday and Friday.
All right, why don't you start them off? Let them know what we're doing.
Because this is more of a Lindsay expertise.
Yeah, I mean, I got my opinions of it, but I'd like you to start off with the topic.
Okay, so today we're going to be talking about Will and Grace. And more specifically, my unpopular opinion that I think Will and Grace is deeply toxic. Now, that said, I have always been a Will and Grace fan, believe it or not. I started watching it back in like 2003 because it came out in 98 originally, but I was a little too young to appreciate it by that point. I was only like 9 years old. So I didn't start watching it till like my freshman year of high school. And then I got all the DVDs and stuff and started watching those. And this is just, this right now I'm referring to the first part of the series, not the spinoff, but like the second part they tried to do in the 2020 era. I'm talking about like the 98 through like 2000. Let's see, what was the original Will and Grace runtime? It was like 98 to 2000 something, 2005, I think. Because we're going to be touching on both versions of the series, the new and the old. Now, that said, being a fan of Will and Grace, I've watched it quite extensively. There was 11 seasons. It ran from 98 to, it says 2020, but that's not.
It looks like NBC counts all of them as, like, both versions as one series now.
Yeah, but in this case, it's a little different, and I'll explain why. So, back when Will and Grace first came out in 98, the world was a very...
the original series.
2006 is when it ended.
2006, yes.
Okay, so... I knew it ended when I was in high school, so I started getting into it more in the 2003 era, and then I got the DVDs. When Will and Grace first came out, we were in a very different world. We were literally in a pre-9/11 world when it first started. In the 90s and early 2000s, the world was a little bit more shallow. It was less sensitive to political correctness. It was less sensitive to gay culture.
At the time, we were in an era that Tyler Durden from Fight Club would refer to as the middle children of history.
Right.
There was no Great War, no Great Depression. The point he was making is that there was no conflict that defined or allowed them to grow as character.
Gen X's world. It was Gen X's world at the time, really. Yeah. Now we millennials are sharing it with Gen X. But it was just a little... There was more stuff to be shallow about. Like, you didn't have as many major problems in the world, so people were kind of up their own ass. And Will, Grace, Karen, and Jack were also characters that were up their own ass. They were very toxic people. I wouldn't even necessarily call them all bad people. They were toxic. Not even to other people, just to themselves even. They hurt so many people in the process. Will... had abandonment issues because his mom was frigid and cold. His partner, I think of 7 years, left him. He only had Grace, so he was a very wounded guy. And he leaned on Grace as a literal crutch because since college, they're all each other had. And more importantly, it's established that they love each other, but because he's gay, they could never be more than just deeply loving friends, which I think created a toxic issue in Grace, that she low-key on some level, whether it was conscious or not, was sort of hoping that would change.
Yeah, they developed an extreme codependency.
They had such a extreme, they were each other's crutch. So much so that at the 2020 final episode ever of Will and Grace, they get a house together and decide to raise their kids together. Now, there's going to be a lot of spoilers, so if you haven't seen the series through, you might not want to listen right away. Go watch and, develop your own opinions first. When the series first ended in 2006, the original series, it ended with Will and Grace having a kid together.
Yeah.
And then they, for some reason, ended that. And then they did basically essentially the same fucking thing anyway. Like, it was hardly any different. So that said, they both also, Will and Grace both had a deep issue of not wanting to become their mothers, but were doing that anyway.
Right.
Grace used Will as a crutch. She was deeply narcissistic. She thought she could do no wrong. Will only enabled that by being like, oh, honey, it's not you. And they just fed off of each other's poison.
Right.
Will and Jack and Karen were more obviously toxic because they were sort of supposed to be. They were supposed to be, as they described them in the earlier series, as a funhouse version of Will and Grace. So Karen was an alcoholic, pill-addicted, rich woman who was privileged, racist, and sort of a bitch, and yet sort of not. She was kind of complex. Jack is a very well-intended puppy-like person who has puritanism, which is Peter Pan syndrome, which he refuses to grow up. The thing about these characters is I wouldn't have a problem with any of this if I felt like the characters ever faced consequences or learned anything. But even from 98 all the way through 2020 in both versions of the series, no one fucking learned a damn thing, at least for a long period of time. And I will throw you out some examples, and I'm going to explain to you why I think Grace is worst of all of them. Yeah. Well, first, in the new series, Will finally, mind you, Will and Jack met in like 1984, 1985, right. The mid-80s. Right. Jack helped Will come out because Jack was open about being gay and loved who he was despite being younger than Will. And for some godforsaken fucking reason, Will has had this thing up his ass saying that he needs to protect and take care of Jack because Jack helped him come out. On top of which, I think it low-key makes Will feel good about himself to be able to take care of somebody.
He had a thing up his ass?
Irrelevant.
It's just an interesting way to explain that.
Good point. Maybe I shouldn't be saying so much ass stuff right now. It's a little too on the nose. But it's also Will had this fatherly energy throughout the series, and it's addressed that he tries to put these paternal feelings onto Jack and other people. And again, I can relate to that on some level. I literally mother everybody because I need to have a baby so bad my head's going to explode. I get it. There's some people who are just very deeply maternal and paternal people, but the problem is he wasn't doing it the right way. He was being a toxic parent to Jack, incidentally. Right. In this new series, it's addressed that Jack needs to start paying his own way. Will has always helped Jack with rent and things like that, but over time, Jack just kept taking more advantage. He forced Will to pay for his LASIK eye surgery, sex toys that he had custom made. He ran up Will's credit card so fucking much. And I mean, yeah, Will's a successful lawyer, but the problem with enabling a friend like that is they're not going to want to like earn their own money. So Jack had dreams and goals, but he never pursued them because he never fucking had to. Right. So what ends up happening is he addresses this after, he has his LASIK eye surgery. He sits him down at a brunch place they go to, a drag bar they go to all the time. Tells Jack he needs to pay his own well, and there was nothing unreasonable about it. He just said, look, I think because I love you, I need to cut you off, blah, 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 which is exactly what I would have done. I mean, I don't have any problem helping my friends with money once in a while, but if someone's taking advantage, I'm going to be like, no, I can't do that. Jack had a full-ass tantrum and flipped out. Finally, Jack starts to accept the fact that Will is not going to fucking do this for him anymore. I mean, mind you, Jack has his own husband. He has a whole other life now. He doesn't need this weird incesty support system. I say incesty because like Will's like a brother and like a lover. The whole group is so incestuous and it's all over the damn place, and they're always shitting where they eat. He finally accepts that, like, he kind of gets to the point where he's accepting the fact that Will won't pay for him. And Will's just like, you know what? I've come to a decision. I like the fact that your inner child is in there and that you're never going to totally grow up. That's what makes you, Jack. The problem I have with this, there is nothing wrong with embracing your inner child. There's no problem in certain people having a very childlike quality to them and an innocence and even like a carefree spirit. Hell, I'm a carefree spirit. I'll be the first person to tell you to get in a convertible, take off your top, smoke a blunt, and drive to the beach. But I'm also not going to be the first person to tell you to do that because it's going to harm you. Paying Jack's way all the fucking time does not keep his inner child alive. It keeps his inner codependent adult alive. A puritanist is somebody who never grows up in any facet. Mm-hmm. Someone with a very healthy inner child is someone like us that can tap in and out of it when they need to.
But a puritanist, there is no real inner child because they are still the child.
Their body has grown up, but they have not.
Psychologically, they're just still children. and they refuse to become anything else.
Those guys that you talk about, like living in your parents' basement and like not having jobs and stuff, sort of people.
This was the entire point of the Peter Pan story. It was a story exploring fictionally and fantasizing the idea of a pure eternus, a person that refused to grow up. And also, pure eternuses, like Peter Pan, not only did they not want to grow up, they tended to hate the idea of adults in general to a point where they would demonize other adults around them.
Well, yeah, and that's just one, and that's just the shallow end of the pool of it. Like, the fact that Will decided by enabling his friend was healthier for his friend because he wanted to keep his inner child alive is so fucking toxic.
Yeah.
And this show is not like Always Sunny in Philadelphia. It is not an anti-sitcom. We are not meant to be pointing out what the fuck is wrong with these people and why they're wrong.
Yeah, can I chime in on that one a little bit?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, really quick, I want
you to chime in. This is part of you too.
My ex was a fan of Will and Grace as well. She introduced me to the show, the original show. She loved it. Lindsay liked the original show.
Yeah.
I personally, first of all, when I was a child, I did not like Will and Grace because I did not know gay people existed.
That's fair.
I didn't know.
It was the 90s. We didn't know.
I didn't know any. Well, I didn't see it in the 90s. I saw it in the early 2000s.
Wait, wow, really? You didn't know gay people existed?
I didn't find out recently? About gay people until like I was 14.
How the fuck have you lived in New York City your whole life and not known what a gay person was?
I was very sheltered. I'm
surprised you never encountered it ever.
I barely encountered humans in general.
I mean, I even knew what gay was, and I lived in West for fucking Virginia.
I didn't really have any legitimate white people as friends until I was like in college.
See, this is why I tell people to let their kids watch the Golden Girls.
You know, I didn't know, and that's what's funny. I watched the Golden Girls, but I just didn't understand those episodes. But that's why I didn't like.
And you never thought to ask your mom. You just never were like, so.
It was a concept that was so foreign that it didn't enter my mind to form the question.
It's okay. When you watch Will and Grace, so tell me.
I didn't like the show because I didn't understand what the jokes were. I didn't know what was going on. And, you know, the media back then, they still do this bullshit now. They don't let gay men be gay on camera that often. So they'll like imply that they have a sexual relationship, but they won't let them kiss or anything like that.
Well, they actually addressed that on an episode of the earlier seasons of Will and Grace. The first half, the 98, 2006, there was an episode where they were supposed to have a gay kiss on a TV show they all liked.
Right.
And they didn't show the kiss. So Will and Grace went to protest at NBC, and then Will wanted to prove a point, so he kissed Jack on camera. Now, I liked, like, those moments were also very good about that show, but there was also too much toxicity for that to make any difference to me.
That was really meta, because isn't Will and Grace an NBC show?
Yeah.
And they let him do that? That's interesting. Anyway, so I didn't get it when I was a kid. I did not get that. But later, I was reintroduced to it because my ex was she is in the LGBTQA plus community. Am I missing acronyms?
I don't think so. I mean, I just say LGBT plus to be inclusive. Just say everybody QA, you know.
All right, yeah. She was in that community. So she introduced me to the show. And I got it then, but it still wasn't like, she didn't force me to watch it or anything, and it still wasn't appealing to me. There was no real reason for it. I just don't
sometimes you just don't want to watch a show.
I'll admit I have an aversion to sitcoms because I understand the history and structure of how sitcoms work, and they piss me off because they're not authentic enough. But that's why I didn't watch Will and Grace that time. On the third time, when Lindsay she started watching the re-release.
Yeah, the new series, the new version.
The new version of Will and Grace. That's when I started to notice just how horrifyingly toxic the show was. Well, as Lindsay has already stated, there's a such thing as an anti-sitcom and a sitcom. What an anti-sitcom is when they use the platform of, a sitcom essentially takes human behavior and boils it down into these overly simplistic constructs of information that's isolated to these 30-minute blocks that usually end in a happily ever after, like things are going to be resolved and everything's going to be okay. If I remember correctly, the person who invented the sitcom format, it was designed specifically to help white families feel better around the society that they were in. Again, I don't remember that fully correctly. I got to research that again, because the last time
that makes sense, because that's why the Cosby Show at the time was so big, because it was a black family having good things happen to them.
The last time I did heavy research on sitcoms was something like 5 to 6 years ago, so I got to up my research on it. But that's what I remember roughly. Anyway.
Situational comedy.
The situational comedy was designed to take situations that were no matter what they were, and it boils them down culturally. And me, I'm the kind of guy that hates shit like that. I don't like having chunks of reality boiled down. I like Lindsay always says that the reason I don't do drugs or alcohol of any kind is because I prefer the raw dog reality, where she's absolutely right. I don't like reality being hidden from me. I like reality as it is, no matter how dark and messed up it is, and I'll deal with it then.
The thing about things like weed and shrooms, though, it opens reality more to you. It's not shielding anything. But basically, in short, Charles doesn't like anything that could be wrapped up with a ba-da-ba-ba-ba-da.
No, I don't like that shit. And the fact that there's a laugh track, that just aggravates me more.
Not every sitcom has that, but I hate laugh tracks too.
Yeah, not every sitcom does that. But because when you take the laugh track away from these sitcoms, all you have is a bunch of people pausing awkwardly after saying something that's not funny. And it's like, I don't want a TV show thinking for me. No. I don't want the lazy writing of a sitcom. I would prefer to watch something where the people who are behind it actually put in the effort to earn the laughter from me.
Some sitcoms, like for example, The Golden Girls and certain shows, the laugh track is so, like, you get so invested in the show you hardly notice it.
Yeah, The Golden Girls is a special example because you can take the laugh track off of that. But like, I tried
watching the Absolutely Fabulous show, that British comedy.
Yeah, that
laugh track was so repugnant. No, the show wasn't trash. That laugh track was so repugnant, I couldn't sit through it. It was the same with that show, Disjointed. Not only was Disjointed just poorly written, but I'm a pothead who loves Kathy Bates more than like I love most things. I love weed and Kathy Bates, and they ruined both. But the laugh track was so awful that it was so, like, I don't, if I have a show with a laugh track, I want to hear it so subtly in the background that it's not like,
yeah, like My Wife and Kids was a good sitcom that I liked. They did not have a laugh track. They just had a studio audience.
King of Queens, did they have one?
They had a studio audience.
Okay, yeah, King of Queens is great.
Yeah,
But
those two were legitimately funny shows.
None of that's too repugnant, but yeah, the point is, Charles does not like sitcoms, but anti-sitcoms are the opposite. Where
like Always Sunny It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia is a great example of an anti-sitcom because they take the format of a situational comedy and they turn it on its head as a way. In Always Sunny, especially, the entire point of the show is to observe negative behavior in the Western world. In fact, there was a quote that Glenn Howerton, who plays Dennis Reynolds, he said that,
and one of the creators.
Yeah, because they kind of had a hard time explaining what the show was, and I can see why. But he said that Always Sunny is what happens when the American dream fails.
Basically, every character on that show is garbage, but it's garbage.
It's garbage with reason.
It's garbage with, like, even every character has some sort of learning lesson from it. They always suffer the consequences of their own bullshit.
That show has. It's plainly simple. The show is self-aware. The show has a point to make about people, which is why what the show says about humanity is different from what the characters are saying about humanity. There's literally been episodes where the characters were trying to justify blackface, but the characters were racist. The show itself was trying to show you what a racist looks, sounds, thinks, and talks like.
Very Mel Brooksy in that regard, where Mel Brooks pointed out who was shitty. The thing about Will and Grace is I watched all of it through, all the first seasons, 98 to 2006. When the new season came out, the 2020, and I'm going to explain to you why. I'm pretty sure why this show fucking didn't last in today's society and also just went to shit even further. I was watching it because I've committed this far. I watched the fucking first thing, and I'm one of these people that I'm going to see some shit through. God fucking damn it. So I watched the first couple episodes of Will and Grace, the new season, and I just kept looking at Charlie. And I mean, I have grown leaps and bounds since 2006. I've survived so much shit. I'm a totally different human being than I was in 2006. So I'm watching it and I'm like, yo, these people are shit.
Yeah.
And my favorite character incident, well, I've always liked Jack and Karen, but they ruined Karen completely because they made her a Trump supporter.
Yeah, didn't they make her worse than she was?
They made her worse than she was before.
Yeah.
And like the thing is, when she was on the original series, she was hilarious because in a way, the point about Karen was she was the only one that I think was anti-sitcom material because you really were supposed to learn what a selfish sack of shit she was.
If I'm remembering correctly, in the original series,
it was supposed to be Will and Grace were the reasonable ones, and Jack and Karen were trash. That was supposed to be.
Let's just refer to it as
the OG.
Karen Mach 1. Karen Mach 1 was a toxic, privileged, rich liberal who fetishized people, like she fetishized gay culture,
even
and
if
then
she
she was
wasn't
kind
a
of
liberal,
ignorant.
they never identified that. They identified her as somebody who was tolerant of gay people. She was racist, but it came from, I don't think it was even coming from a place of hate. I think she was just fucking privileged and too high and drunk to give a shit.
Yeah, but even then, like,
she had some redeemable qualities.
that's the kind of thing that I didn't like, because again, the show lacks self-awareness.
Right, that was the point.
And let me just reiterate. When you're looking for self-awareness in a TV show, you need to ask yourself, is what the character's saying and doing different from the point that the show is making about, like, what is the show saying and what are the characters saying? If the show and the characters are saying the same thing and trying to justify the same action, that means that there is no self-awareness.
But see, in the original Will and Grace, they would call Karen out for her bullshit all the time. That was the point. Like,
well, actually, that's oversimplification. It depends on how they present it. Like, for example, there's an episode of Always Sunny, one of the best episodes at the end of season 13, I think, where Mac finds his pride, and at the end of the episode, Mac did an interpretive dance as a way to come out to his father, and the show was making a point about what it was
it was the last
like.
episode of season 13. It was the finale, and I'll tell you, that episode itself was very beautiful.
The show was making a point about what it was like for a gay person to come out, the spiritual journey that one has to go through in order to just accept yourself authentically.
It was very emotional.
Yeah. After a while, it had less to after a while, it became something anybody could relate to. It had less to do with the fact that he was gay and more to do with the fact that he was fighting to be his full self, openly and vulnerably, right in front of his dad.
As a person who was raised Christian and all that, a Catholic and all that shit, and all this time his friends all around him were like, yo, you gay, and they've like accepted this a long time ago, and they keep pointing it out, but they just had to let him come to that conclusion on his own.
Now, the opposite of that show would be the example that Lindsay earlier made, the Puritannist episode. Well, that's not the name of the episode, but the Puritannist episode of Will and Grace, where Will tries to force Jack to address the fact that he's a Puritanist, then Will checks back into his own toxicity and realizes that he isn't needed by this broken person. So he's like, I want you to be broken again so I can feel needed.
Yeah.
And Jack literally drops all of his character growth in that episode and becomes this.
And that's not the first time that Will has let Jack drop character growth and shit too. That he kept him like this on purpose. Now, we're not gonna be able to touch on every example, but another one I need to really point out was an episode, because this one bothers me. I am a pansexual woman. And there has been two examples, one in the OG Will and Grace and one in the newer season of bi and pansexual eraser.
Yeah, please explain what that is.
So if you are bi and pansexual, you will notice that there is seldom, and more so today there is more, but there's less, there's always gay representation and straight representation, but very seldom is a character portrayed as bi or pan. And even fans will be like, no, that character is a lesbian. You'd be like, yeah, but that character dated a male in the last season and loved him, and they broke up, and now she's dating a female, and you're just going to disregard that other relationship. That happened in Willow and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. There's so many people out there that are like, Willow's been a lesbian, and I'll probably get flack for this too. They'll be like, Willow's a lesbian. I'd be like, yeah, but Willow dated this guy named Oz and loved him. Oz cheated on her and left to go become a better person and control his shit. And she fell in love with a woman named Tara. Now, it's possible that maybe she was a lesbian the entire time.
Yeah, like she got retconned.
Or that she like, or no, not so much like even this. I'm talking about just her development as a person. And she just didn't know.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Because you can have emotional attachments to people that you love. Maybe you just didn't realize you weren't attracted to them or something. But from, their relationship, it just felt like they were trying to erase the fact that she was bi or pan and just try to put her in a box. And
you're saying that this is something that bi and pan people have to deal with all the time.
Well, every section of the LGBT community suffers in some way. And the way that pansexual and bisexual people suffer is people are always like, you need to pick a side, or being bi or pan is just a stop off to being gay, or this is just, this is just a phase or whatever. And it's a very common problem in society. So in the original Will and Grace, there was an episode where Will and Karen both have an attraction to Karen's pastry chef. pastry chef explains to them that he is pansexual. He ends up having a sexual relationship with Karen, and it is also later revealed, hilariously, just because it's Rosario, he was also having a romantic relationship with Rosario, the maid.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I remember that episode.
And the only reason it was so funny because Rosario came out in her nightgown and was like, come have sex with me before the show is off or whatever, my stories are on or whatever. It was like she was wearing her nightgown and like...
But I remember that episode. They treated him like he was some kind of weird subhuman just because, and he was more stable than any character I've seen on that show.
Karen ends up firing him.
Yeah.
First of all, she was going to fire him. Will manipulates her into not firing him because he thinks he's hot. Mm-hmm. Then when they find out he's fucking Rosario, they're like, yeah, I'm going to fire him. Now, there's several things wrong with that. Again, keep in mind, this is in the 90s, early 2000s, so people were not as involved yet. Pansexuality did exist, but people were not as accepting. So at first, when I saw that episode, I thought they were trying to address that this is a thing. People need to stop dismissing it. But later, I found out that to not be the case in the new season. So Will and Karen already abused a pansexual person. They were talking about how gross it was that he would have sex with, both or whatever, or to pick a side, all that pansexual eraser bullshit. Then they have this episode where Billy Lord guest stars. Mm-hmm. Her character comes in and is like, this is my boyfriend. I forgot his name. We're going to get married. He's bi, I'm bi. Now, my concern, she says we're going to get married. My maternal concern was like, are you guys ready to be married? You're very young. Do you guys feel like you could stay married and be happy? That would be like if my niece was like, I'm getting married and she was like 19, 20, or however young, I'd be like, you're still in college. Are you sure you want to do that? That's a pretty typical concern.
Right.
Their concern was not that. Their concern was he's bisexual. He's actually gay. And it all came from Grace's fucking trauma of the fact that Will was dating her and then came out of the closet.
Yeah.
And she put all of that emotional bullshit on her niece, made her feel like fucking garbage. And also, this is a big common problem. Not only is bisexual and pansexual eraser a problem, there's also the fact that people try to erase bisexual and pansexual men. Yeah. Specifically. Bisexual and pansexual men get treated so fucking badly. I mean, we all get treated, like women get exploited because we're like, oh, we're trying to get a three-way. And then men be like, oh, you're not bi, you're just fucking gay, and you're afraid to admit it. Like, there's all sorts of abuse about it. So... That being said, for this to have taken place in 2020, and it didn't feel like they were trying to say, oh, this was a wrong thing to do. All Billy Lord's character did was tell them they were wrong and leave, and they only felt bad because it was too far gone and fucked up. Will and Grace, specifically Grace, only feels bad when the repercussions hit her.
Yeah, I just...
Do you want to tell the story about the fire?
I need to.
I'll tell about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. You tell about the fire.
So... When watching, every once in a while, when one of these newer episodes came out and I came across a room and Lindsay would watch it and I was like, just wanted to spend time with her, I would watch these shows and eventually I just have to leave the room because of how angry Grace Adler specifically made me.
We're going to be talking more about the new series because the toxicness definitely didn't work in today's climate, so it's even more voluminous. But two, it's more prevalent because it's more fresh in my brain.
And it's also easier to find.
Yeah.
So...
Well, there's on Hulu.
There's an episode where Grace Adler, who apparently she ran into a guy that she dated in the original series.
Let me give the backstory on this thing because you don't really know the full-fledged of that relationship, right?
No, I remember.
Oh,
she dated a guy in the original series, and then she cheated on him with his son, and then she cheated on him after that with his father. She
fucked 3 generations of that family.
Because she felt like it. That's basically, there's no other explanation for it. She just did it because Dick was available.
Like these guys, she realized her boyfriend's entire family was hot, so she plowed all of them.
So they break up. Now, this incredibly unself-aware show that feels like it's written by people that's never met any other human beings decided, let's get this character back on the show, and he's gonna basically forgive and ignore all of the horrific, incredibly toxic antisocial behavior of this person.
On top of that,
because they're in an elevator. Mind you, she was being antisocial in this elevator and decide, you want to try it again? We try again.
She was pregnant.
Oh, she was pregnant at the time?
Yeah, he was okay with the fact that she was having someone else's baby. He was okay with the fact that a few years back, she fucked his entire fucking family. Like, this dude is already way too forgiving.
Yeah,
because that bitch needed to be yeeted into the sun for that.
And it's like that character. That character only makes sense if you have no self-awareness at all.
Or if you just really hate yourself.
Now, after this character got entered, they proceed to having Grace and him have sex, whatnot.
They have a really lovely date.
Right. And then
she even says, like, this feels like I got to start over. She had, like, this whole chance of having this new relationship.
Then he leaves the house for whatever reason. I don't remember.
He had to go to work, and he said, just take your time leaving. They lived in the same building. He was upstairs.
Oh, okay. So so he leaves the house. She goes to the bathroom, takes a shit. And the smell is really bad and the toilet clogs, right?
It was just the thing is she had said, even it was like mentioned earlier, she ate Mexican food before the date so she could eat lightly on the date to already look better. So she's already thinking selfishly. She couldn't make it to her own toilet because the shit she had was insurmountable. So she takes like this rhinoceros type shit in the toilet, which I'm sure everybody has been there. Mm-hmm. Not pleasant, especially in your date's apartment. So I can sympathize why that was embarrassing.
Yeah, that wasn't really where she messed up.
No, not
There's
at all.
nothing wrong with that.
Sometimes that shit happens, literally.
But how she handled it which is her MO, is what was messed up. So she tried to hide it. Actually, why don't you? Because it gets me so mad. I can't remember the full details.
Also, this is a character breakdown of Grace. What happens when Grace finds herself in trouble is, I think with Grace, they tried to do this Lucille Ball type bullshit, but it just, didn't work because of the character and the way they wrote it. Because Lucille Ball and I Love Lucy, it was self-aware that she was the clown of the show, and we were supposed to find her in ridiculous things. It was slapstick, very much like Laverne and Shirley. It was supposed to be like that. So Grace, in typical Grace fashion, she tries to be dishonest to make herself look better. Then she covers it up with more lies. And eventually everything snowballs to a point where everything gets so out of control, she cannot lie anymore. And then she starts crying and begging for forgiveness because she got caught. So let me break this down. So she takes a shit in this guy's toilet, just blows up. She just punished his toilet. She lights some lavender candles and calls a plumber. Again, this is not where she went wrong. That is exactly what I would do. Plumber comes and says basically he can't do the job because it's so huge.
Didn't he say he had to go to his zoologist friend to get additional tools?
Yeah, it was supposed to be just a comedically large shit. Yeah. Now, at this point, I can understand why she did what she did. At this point, I would have called my date and been like, this is a little embarrassing. I clogged her toilet. I've called somebody to fix it. It's pretty gnarly. Why don't you just, stay out a little after work? Because I'm afraid the apartment will smell. I'll stay here until this is handled. That's what she should have done. What does she do instead? After lighting the lavender candles, and the plumber leaves, the bathroom then is set on fire because she lit so many candles. She struggles to find the fucking fire extinguisher. She manages to puts out the fire, and then fucking trashes his apartment in the process. Then, on top of trashing his apartment, you see her put some of his shit in her purse.
Oh, yeah, she steals
steal from him.
Separately.
Well, she doesn't actually end up doing it. She ends up giving it back, but she did steal.
But that wasn't even related to the conflict. No, she just decided to steal.
No, she just decided to steal, which is just crazy. He comes in and sees this mess, and instead of explaining, because to me, if I came home and this all happened, other than my bathroom being destroyed, I would just laugh, because this is a hilarious story. I would just think this was ridiculous, and I would just be glad she was okay. Instead, she lies and says that the apartment was robbed, that she left and came back and he had gotten robbed. They go all the way to calling the police. She tries to get a female officer to sympathize and lie for her. And of course she does not. She snitches on her because that's what she's supposed to fucking do. And she ends up making this huge fiasco and this embarrassment. The worst part is, after this, that guy tries going out with her again. It is so bad that Grace looks at him and goes, why? Why do you keep doing this to yourself? It's like she literally knows how fucking horrible she is.
In addition to the fact that when he talks about getting his apartment fixed, she says that she could do it because she's an interior designer.
Then she tries to charge him.
Yes, and she says she's going to charge him for basically committing art. She wants him to pay her for the arson she committed in his own bathroom.
And again, a decency person would have been like, look, I took a huge shit. And candles burned your bathroom a little bit. I am an interior designer. I will fix this for you. This is my fault. Like, that is what a decent person would do, but that's not what Grace Adler is.
Look, on the real, I don't presume to know the in and outs of the gay community because I do not have to live with that every day because I'm a straight person. That being said, I legitimately do not understand why this show is popular in the gay community, outside of the fact that representation was scarce and an issue, especially in 98.
Well,
it's just, this is such a horrible representation of culture in general.
Well, I feel
if
like
they had a show like this and it was about black people, I would have threw up in my damn breakfast every day.
The 90s to 2006, Will and Grace worked for the society we were in because we were less evolved, we had less representation, and we were just where we were at.
Yeah, you took what you could get. I get that.
But
I get that.
No, we were also where we were at in society. Like, society now cares more about deeper and better things. This is what I keep saying. When you want to reboot something from the 90s, 80s, and early 2000s, you just fucking shouldn't at this point, because especially if you're going to keep the formula the same, because the world is not the same fucking place. The world is not even the same fucking place it was a year ago.
Yeah.
We are constantly changing. There's just not enough nuance for the human world.
Put it like this. Everything that 9/11 made okay to do is now the very things that people are ripping down statues over.
Yeah.
Think about that for a second. And this show was older than that.
So, that being said, there was another example. I forgot where the fuck Grace was in a rush to do something. And she was running through the city. And she knocked down an old lady and took the old lady's cab.
Oh, God.
Now, from what I remember, the incident wasn't even worth rushing that hard. They later found out that the old lady she knocked down was Ruth Bader fucking Ginsburg, who I don't even need to say what she means to society and to women as a whole.
You know what? Not everybody knows who that is.
But,
I'm just gonna look up real quick.
Okay. Just so we can give the exact... Because Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she's a Supreme Court justice, but here's the thing.
Joan Ruth Bader is an American lawyer and jurist who is an associate justice in the U.S. Supreme Court. Ginsburg was appointed by President Bill Clinton and took the oath of office on August 10th, 1993.
She is literally a feminist icon, and she is a very powerful woman. And the thing is, Grace walks around this show all the time screaming that she's a feminist. She knocked down the symbolism of fucking feminism to get a cab and put herself first. So
she's like the modern day Susan B. Anthony.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Yeah, you're Ruth Bader. Yeah, not Grace.
No, I was just clarifying that.
Yeah.
So basically, Ruth Bader Ginsburg is just amazing. And Grace knocked her down to steal a cab. They later interview in this show, they show... Grace freaking out because, like, oh my God, I'm the woman who knocked down RGB. They later revealed that Ruth Bader Ginsburg was talking about it on the show, and she was like, oh, I understand what it's like to be a young woman in a rush, and it had something to do with love or whatever. And it was like, I'm like, no true feminist would say that, They'd be like, what the fuck was that shit? I mean, you just don't... She just basically got off scot-free. Like, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was knocked down, and they said, what about that woman that knocked you down? She's like, oh, it's fine. Like, no. What the... No.
Now, here's the thing. The reason...
And she got no consequences from it at all.
And again, I want to make sure we're clarifying this, because ideas like this are pretty sophisticated, and people tend to fuck these things up pretty badly. They get them twisted. Right. So let's just break this down. If this happened on Always Sunny... Here's how it would play out. Deandra would knock down Ruth Bader Ginsburg and suffer consequences by the end of the episode because the show does not agree with the character's action. But on Will and Grace Adler didn't suffer any consequences. That means the show and the action were synchronized. Yeah. So the show thought it was okay for her to get away with it, which is why the character
they just didn't want her to suffer any consequences. And I mean, that again is not the first fucking example of their character selfishness. Let's see. We cover, like, what other ones did we want to mention? Because there were a lot of incidences.
The Trump cake?
Yeah.
The Trump cake was a really stupid one because it was like, this was the worst possible way that they could have had a conversation about freedom of speech. Like, they bastardized the conversation of freedom of speech.
Now, here's the thing. They were referencing... bakers refusing to make cakes for gay weddings. Now, that's in a gay show that is allegedly pro-LGBT. This is a great topic to discuss. It's a very relevant topic. How private businesses do have the right to refuse business of people, but is it technically ethically correct? This is a conversation everybody needs to have. Where do the ethics draw the line? This is very important. There was an episode where Karen wanted a cake made for Donald Trump because, I think they mentioned in the earlier series they knew them, but I didn't know, they didn't need to make her a Trump supporter. They could have turned him away, but no. So the baker is just like, no, I won't make this cake. Now, Grace was on the side of the baker, but I think Will or someone else pointed out, well, we're all hurt if they turn away gay people. So, what's the difference of them turning away Karen? And again, that's not a bad discussion to have. Now, mind you, I would turn away a Trump cake myself. But I understand what the show was trying to address, but they fell flat entirely. So what was the resolution of that? What ended up happening again? Because I don't even remember the full...
The resolution is that Grace Adler went into the shop and showed her ass while they forced Karen to do very cliched and empty lines about being a Trump supporter.
Yep, and that's what it was.
She basically made the point in this monologue about how because of freedom of speech, in spite of not agreeing with the person, it's something they need to do. And yeah, that's true in principle, but there was a much better way of telling that principle, of explaining that principle. It was too choppy. There wasn't enough anything to it. There was not enough substance. The problem with Will and Grace is I don't think it's even intended to be toxic. I think it lacks so much substance it comes off toxic. But this is what I don't understand. Because my experience of the gay community was primarily shaped around the Pride movement that happened that led to gay marriage being legalized.
You're asking, basically, you want to know why gay people and LGBT people support Will and Grace, right?
Well, my initial logic is representation and access was an issue back then. And I totally get it. You didn't get channels like one of my favorite channels being Logo. You didn't get channels like Logo until years after bullshit like that. I can explain
this. This is so.
I mean, you had Bravo, but come on,
you're right.
You
representation
really
was important in the 90s and early 2000s. Now, a lot of reasons why. Well, the series failed after the new series failed after one season. That just shows you where society is.
That was only one season. I thought it was like 2 or 3.
It was only 1 or 2. It wasn't. It just started last year. The reason it failed so badly is because, most of us as individuals, fans of the show, have evolved, grown past certain mental phases, and really only watched it because we liked the old show. And I've heard several people say they didn't really like the show now. Yeah. Not just me. Our friend Katie even said it. Yeah. We don't need that kind of representation anymore. We have so much now, and we're only gaining more that we have now positive gay icons to look at. Like, even, for example, Zelda Spellman of Chilling Adventures of Sabrina has been involved with men and women on the show. Okay. That's something to look at. Or, there's so many more modern shows that are representing gay people and queer people and the LGBT community as a whole better. So we've grown past the need for Will and Grace. Okay. People were loyal to the show and they watched it. That's another reason why people watched it. But I think also some people haven't mentally grown, so they still think Will and Grace is great. So there's a few reasons why people still would watch it.
You're saying there's some people that were just as toxic as those characters were, and they have remained so.
If you notice, there's a lot of shows out there that are toxic, and people were like, "Oh my god, I love this character so much." I mean, look at all the people who try to identify with Harley Quinn and be like, "I'm Harley Quinn."
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Back in the 90s, it was one thing to hear your friends be like, I'm such a Jack or I'm such a Karen. But now if you say that shit, you're just you're a terrible person. Yeah, my ex would say that too, that she was what she specifically said, because she had a friend back then, and they were referred to each other as Jack and Karen. I had that kind of relationship with Conchetta. Yeah. But the thing is, since then, Conchetta, me, and a bunch of other fans have grown with society. The culture is more respectful to the gay community. We're trying to be better people every day in society. So just the shit that worked in the 90s just doesn't work anymore. I mean, this is a whole other show, but it's the same thing with Sex and the City, as I've touched on many times.
Right. Yeah. Can we go into that?
Very briefly, because I'd like to do a whole episode about that at some point, but
don't worry about the time, because this is an important topic. But I'm ignorant to Sex and the City too. But I thought that show was one. Initially, I just thought it was boring and not for me. I was a teenage boy.
It's a show about 4 white women in the city.
Yeah.
Like, that was talking about their sex lives, and I can understand why a teenage boy could not fucking relate.
I was a black teenage boy living in the hood.
Heterosexual boy on top of that.
I was a straight black teenage boy living in the hood. I was not about to watch a show about a bunch of privileged white women living in a different district of Manhattan taking advantage of people.
This is another show that I really loved, and I realized was also deeply toxic. In fact, they also... So for those who are not fans of Sex and the City or have never seen it, it's about these 4 women that live in New York City. One's a publicist, one's a lawyer, one works in an art gallery, and the other one's a columnist. Now, they all are very successful. They all live really well. But because of that, they're 4 privileged white women. And again, this was more relevant in the 90s and early 2000s. They're a little out of touch. And being out of touch was more excusable in the 90s as far as I'm concerned, because we did not achieve what we've achieved since. And even the early 2000s, pre 9/11, people were just fucking toxic as hell. And we shouldn't be enabling that now.
No.
That's why I'm glad they haven't tried to restart this show or whatever.
Well, they did those movies.
Yeah.
Do those count?
No, not really, because they've dropped Sex in the City since then. Like, it's over now. Like, there's no more shit coming out for it.
Okay.
There was a whole episode on Sex in the City about Bi Racer as well. So I told you about this, right?
Briefly, I don't remember it.
So
Please explain.
Carrie starts dating this guy. And now, mind you, Carrie herself, they all had their issues, but Carrie was self-sabotaging in relationships. She was in love she was in love with the same dude the whole series, who was this toxic piece of shit named Mr. Big. They were both just pieces of shit. And any good guy that Carrie had been with, she fucking ruined those relationships horrendously. So I'll first go into the Bi Eraser, and then I'll go into the kink shaming.
Okay.
Bi Eraser and Sex in the City was, Carrie was dating this he was hot, he was nice, he had all of this shit going for him. They're out ice skating one day and having a perfectly lovely date, and he mentions that he had a boyfriend before and that he was bi, and talking about that. Now, a lot of people who know this, especially back in the 90s and early 2000s, the queer community is very close. We're very close-knit for the most part. It's very incestuous almost, because everybody's dated everybody. Even in New York City, believe it or not, it's a very small world here. So this dude was not only bi, and that made Carrie uncomfortable. He was also very close with his exes. All of his friends at some point had dated each other. Most of them were bi. Most of them had families and were married now. But, they were just a very open-minded group of people, very sexually liberated and very cool. He didn't plan on having polyamorous relationships or anything like that. He wanted to be with Carrie, but he had boyfriends and stuff before. Carrie's already uncomfortable with it. She has a whole conversation with her toxic girlfriends. Miranda, who is the more judgmental one, is like, there's no such thing as bi. That's just a stop to gay town, blah, blah, blah. By the way, Cynthia Nixon, I love her, but I was really mad at her for being okay saying those lines, considering she herself is a gay woman.
I thought she was bisexual.
No, she's a fucking lesbian.
She wasn't bisexual?
I mean, not to my knowledge. As far as I know, Cynthia Nixon identified lesbian.
Okay.
But my point is, she is in the queer community.
Okay.
And as an actor and performer who is queer, even in a character, I don't think I would ever be comfortable saying such a line. Just ethically. It just wouldn't feel right. It would taste in my mouth. I wouldn't like it. And I mean, I get you're not yourself, but there's just certain things you have to draw your fucking line at.
Well, maybe,
I'm not judging her. Again, it was a different time too. This was.
Well, at the same, I don't want to speak for her or you. I'm thinking maybe as a gay woman, she knew that this was a problem, and she decided to help tell that story.
I have to show you that episode because it was how it was addressed. To me,
you'd have
in
to
my
show
mind, it sort of came off more toxic than helpful.
Because to me, that kind of reminds me, and again, you will have to show me this so I can have a more informed opinion.
And there's the subject of Bi Eraser and the learning lesson of it, but this wasn't one of those cases.
But that reminds me of when you see movies and you see white people playing white slave owners, and they're the antagonists. No,
I understand. Like Leonardo DiCaprio in Django, for example, was a great.
Yeah, he wasn't exactly comfortable.
I get that too.
He wasn't comfortable with it, but because he chose to help tell our story, he was important. He was doing something positive by choosing to represent a negative.
And I agree with you. And I mean, playing a slave owner in a movie where it's pointing out the black struggle, that's useful. But the thing about Leo is you're supposed to view him as a villain. Miranda was a protagonist.
Oh.
Miranda is one of Carrie's best friends. These are all 4 protagonists saying this toxic shit.
Oh, I see.
Now, Samantha...
So the context was fucked up.
Samantha, my favorite one, was the more sexual broad one. She said that she thought bisexuality was evolved and sexy. And I agree. I think it's a very evolved and sexy thing. So Carrie struggles with the fact... Now... If you are not comfortable dating somebody who's bi, or you're not comfortable dating someone who's trans, you better just be fucking straightforward so no one gets hurt. Don't fucking date them if you're not cool with it.
Yeah, don't do that.
Like, don't lead people on and shit. So
that.
this is where she really fucks up. So she goes to this party. Alanis Morissette's in this episode, and I really liked her in that. She did really good, that aside. And she goes to this party, and they're all having fun and drinks, and it's all of his exes and, bisexual friends and his very deeply evolved and cool friends. And they decide to play Spin the Bottle, which, hell, as an adult, that would be really a lot of fun. I never played it as a team, but I imagine as a group of consenting adults, it'd be a great time. And she sits down and, she spins the bottle and it lands on Alanis Morissette's character, and she kisses her. Now, at first, when I was watching this episode, I'm like, oh, good, she's trying this herself. She's putting herself in their world, trying to get past her own judgmental behavior, which... If you're initially judgmental about something and you give something a shot like that and you're cool, that's fine.
Right.
What Carrie did next was fucked up. She first, in her monologue, internal thought, it was just like, it wasn't so bad. Then she gets up and is like, I have to go out and get cigarettes, and literally leaves and never talks to that guy again and just bails on him at that party.
What? Why?
Because she was uncomfortable. But instead of being...
So what did the series say? Because that's what the character did, but what did the series say about that? It
sort of just felt like they were... Like, Carrie was not reprimanded or told she was wrong. That was how that episode ended. She just left and was like, oh. And it was just her internal monologue, which was like, I guess I'm just not capable of dating a bisexual, da-da-da-da-da.
Oh, so the message... Okay, wow.
It was just a little bit...
It was very dismissive.
It was very disrespectful. It was, and that's not the only example of Sex in the City. The other one I mentioned was kink shaming. Yeah. So, Carrie dated this guy. He was a politician running for office. Not in a rapey way, but like aesthetic and handsomeness and everything else. He kind of had a Bill Clinton vibe. He was very charming, very sexy kind of dude. Yeah. And he met her at a fireman. They had a fireman contest. They had local celebrities come and judge a fireman contest for charity. Okay. In Staten Island, which, fuck, that sounds like fun again. Right. And she met him and she was flirting with him and she goes on some dates with him. And they go to have sex and he asks her to pee on him. Now, I have no problem if that's not your fetish. I'm not into it. I'm not. No, me neither. But, and it's cool that she wasn't, comfortable with it. He did try to convince her to do it, but I don't think he
talked to her about this beforehand, or was he just like?
Well, they were seeing each other, but they had sex a couple times. But I think he had to get comfortable enough to tell her such a private and intimate thing.
But that's my question: did he choose to say this before they actually started engaging sexually again, or were they they were about to start?
They had had sex, and they had sex a few times, but he asked her if she would ever be interested in potentially ever doing that.
Oh, so they weren't already about to have sex. It was a separate, non-sexual conversation.
Well, they had sex, and they had just finished having sex in the scene. They were laying in bed, and he was just comfortable enough to be like, because sometimes you have to have sex with people and get comfortable with them before you tell them what you're into.
I just want to get this straight. So he was asking for consent for his fetish before he did it.
Yeah, and he tried to, tell her he really enjoyed it.
That's what I was trying to find out.
And first she didn't react. She was a little taken aback. She even was like, I could compromise and pour some warm tea on you, and you can close your eyes. She was trying to work around it, but she just did not. He even said, we can do it in the shower. He's like, because he first was like, I'd like to go in a shower and get all nice and hot. And he's like, I would like for you to pee on me. And she was very judgy about it initially. And again, like I said, that's not for everybody. That's a pretty specific type of kink. Yeah. The issue I had was not that she wouldn't do it. My issue was that after that, he was a politician running for office. I forgot what he did. He did something that upset her or something, and she wrote about it in her column and outed him, his name and she didn't use his name, but she used a local politician that I was sleeping with, and that was the only politician she had been sleeping with.
Oh my God.
And she ruined this man's reputation because he had a slightly unusual fetish.
And then what did the show do?
That's how it ended.
Oh, that was just, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, Charlotte herself is a very toxic character because she's deeply judgy about everyone's shit. And I mean, yeah, all of these characters are at some point get into an argument with each other, pointing out each other's toxic bullshit, but it's never on how they treat other people. It's how they end up just treating each other. It's not, they're only mad when it affects them.
And this show was popular
also with the LGBT community.
It was?
Oh, yes.
I thought it okay.
Believe it or not.
I thought it was just popular with women.
Well, it was popular with everybody. Like, it was an icon. Like, there was, like, gay men, straight women, lesbians. Everybody liked it on some level. But it had a lot of toxic messages.
Okay.
I mean, like, it wasn't always toxic, but there was so much... Like, okay, here's another example. Again, this isn't just about Carrie. This is just the stuff I'm touching on before we end. This is the biggie.
Okay.
Carrie had that on and off again thing with Mr. Big. Mr. Big ends up marrying a model named Natasha, who is a beautiful and very kind person. Mm-hmm. But she's still portrayed as the fucking enemy in the show, despite never being a bad person or doing anything to Carrie.
She was just assigned
punished.
as a
She was
villain.
punished for existing and being pretty.
And nice.
So, yeah, Natasha was a great girl, and any healthy person would be like, wow, I'm really into this person, but he's moved on. This girl seems great. I mean, sure, it would be painful to see at first, and then you just avoid them, and that's it. She ends up having another affair with Mr. Big. She comes back early from a business trip, catches Carrie in her apartment, chases Carrie out of her apartment down the stairs while Carrie's running, and she's like, Carrie, I knew you were sleeping with him. And as she's talking to her, she's trying to get Carrie to come back so they can talk. She's not even trying to fight with her. She just wants to know what the fuck's going on in her own fucking house. And
wow,
she falls and breaks a tooth and hurts herself really bad trying to chase Carrie down.
Oh my God.
Carrie did take her to the hospital, but all of this shit happened to this girl because of Carrie. Then another episode, Carrie tries to meet with Natasha to apologize or make amends. And she basically tells Carrie, she's like, I have to live with the fact that this tooth will never be the same color as the other tooth. And the fact that you fucked my husband. She's like, why? You just expect me to fucking forgive you? And then Carrie was all butthurt because Natasha wasn't over it.
Oh my God.
That's just some prime examples. But I mean, again, 90s and early 2000s television wasn't perfect. But we cannot take these messages into today.
Yeah, that leads me, because I know we want to wrap up.
And then we're in our closing statements, yeah.
But that leads me to a very important thing that we probably should have said in the beginning. Why is this even important to us? Why is how toxic Will and Grace is?
Because it's a reflection of society, and this is where people learn a lot from TV.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's
TV reflects the world.
You gotta understand, for people listening, you need to understand something about humans. We're very simple. We like to learn things in very easy to digest pockets, and as a result, these pockets. They can be media. A lot of it is media. It can be painting. It can be television. It can be radio, podcast, whatever. We need
entertainment as a species. We need entertainment as the human race.
But the thing is, the things that you choose to watch, you'll absorb and you'll metastasize these ideas, and it will become a function of your character. And then these
it
things
even
that you
reflects how
see,
you feel on the inside.
These things that you see, depending on how you choose to interpret them, will inform how you act as a person. To put it
simply, when we get invested in a TV show, we start looking at those characters as if they're people in our lives. Friends, family. You know, you get attached to a show, you binge a show, you get crushes on characters, you develop fondnesses for certain characters, you get sad when your characters die. These are reflections of ourselves. These are things that we need as humans to express. When we reflect toxicity back in our entertainment, this isn't like a Tipper Gore bullshit of our kids are going to be influenced and da 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 da. We got to censor the media. No, we just, as the world grows and progresses, and as we grow and progress as humankind, we need to let our TV shows reflect that growth. This is why I'm against reboots. This is why I'm against all the shit that reflected back in the 90s and early 2000s, because the world is not that place anymore. And we need the entertainment to be more positive, and we need to learn from it. We need to actually let it feed our minds, not drain them.
Yeah.
And also, there's a spiritual theory of the things you say, the things you witness and stuff, really, it reflects on our body language and our health. We don't even know what's happening, but bringing in toxic feeds toxic.
I'll explain that one. When I was in middle school up and way into high school, I kept running into this poster that really informed how I dealt with myself. and it was a poster that broke down the digestive steps of an idea.
Yeah.
So basically, thoughts become what it was. Ideas become thoughts. Thoughts become habits. Ideas become thoughts. Thoughts become actions. Actions become habits. Habits become character. And character becomes you. Character is you, but that's what it is. Like if you're not very careful about what you watch and how you choose to interpret it, whatever you're watching will become who you are.
And I'm not saying we shouldn't have bad characters, but those bad characters need to be an example of what not to be.
This is why we support It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, because that show specifically is a show talking about this is an example of negative humans living in Western society. This is what they do. This is how they work. This is how they think. This is what they're capable of.
This is why it's bad.
This is why it's bad. Everyone on the show that's not them knows it. And the show knows it. And
I'm not expecting everything to be nicey nice or to wrap up in a nice learning lesson or anything. I'm just saying, Will and Grace should not have been portrayed as the heroes of the show. Carrie Bradshaw and her friends should not have been portrayed as the heroes of their show. Maybe Samantha's the only positive one I can think of, but even Samantha did something toxic by being uncomfortable dating a man who was really short. They all have done something really horrible. And the problem is, not everyone's emotionally intelligent enough to watch these shows and be like, I like these characters in a fictional way, but they're kind of garbage as people. Instead, they want to glorify it and be like, I'm such a Will, or I'm such a Grace, or I'm such a Carrie.
And we shouldn't allow this kind of content to be poisoning culture.
No.
And I'm not talking about Western culture. I mean humanity in general. We are in a stage where we desperately need to evolve in a more conscious way. Because we already unconsciously evolve. We already change and grow. But now we're getting to a stage where we need to be aware of and in control of how we grow and change. Have your shows. Do what you want. Make the content you want. Especially, and not everything has to be all that deep. It could be something stupid.
But just know when a character's being toxic and be aware of these things.
And understand what that does to you. Just recognize that an idea is like food. You digest these things. You metastasize them. They become a part of you. And that's not something you should take lightly.
Everything has a vibe and it feeds it. You know what? This reminds me of a joke I read somewhere, but it wasn't wrong. What's the difference between human society and yogurt?
What's the difference? Because
if you leave yogurt alone for 2,000 years, it'll eventually develop a culture.
Wow. That's funny.
But that's the truth of it. It's like, it's okay to have toxic characters. It's okay to have characters that aren't perfect because no one is perfect. But at least make those characters of an example of what not to be. Or at the very least, when you're watching these shows, like when I watched Will and Grace that last season, I mostly did it for research. But when I was watching it like I didn't want to be these people. And like I was hoping they would get the consequences they deserved. I wasn't rooting for them. I was rooting against them.
Yeah, you weren't even experiencing Schadenfreude. You were literally just you were compelled by the idea of hopefully these people get their comeuppance.
Or that they would learn. I was hoping at some point, but all I did was see toxic people that were toxic for 20 years and haven't matured, that just got worse and worse. And let that be a lesson. This would be my parting thing. Let Will and Grace, all of these experiences teach you that you have two options in this world. You can either keep making excuses and just gradually get worse over time and feed in your own bullshit and let other people enable your bullshit. Or you can look at what the toxicity in yourself is and say, I don't want to be that person. I don't want to look back at 50 years old and be like, what the fuck am I doing? Why hasn't my life changed? Because it hasn't changed because you haven't changed. You just kept feeding the poison. Like that old Native American saying, there's two wolves inside of you, a good and evil. Whatever one you feed is the one that will come through you.
Yeah.
And that's basically my parting argument. Have your entertainment, enjoy your shows, but try to be self-aware enough within yourself of who to reflect and who is not a good example. Even if the show's self-aware or not. You can manage that yourself. All
right, my final remark. Ideas are like food. You have to make sure they're nutritious. Otherwise, they'll just poison and kill you.
Mm-hmm. Can't mentally eat McDonald's all the time.
No, you can't. Got to eat something more healthy. Get some Carl Jung in them lungs or something.
Take a hit of Jung.
Yeah. Anyway.
Take a sip of Jug O Sip.
Oh yeah, it's called Jug O Sip. Why didn't we do a Jug O Sip? Okay, do one. You do one.
Take a Jug O Sip and a hit of young.
Take a Jug O Sip.
A sip of jug.
A sip of jug. All right.
Sip of the jug, sip of the jug.
Okay. On that note, we will see you in the next one.
Man.